For the very beginning oath, we have an-Naaziaat. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. Allah swears by an-Nazi', comes from naza', which means to yank something out violently, to pull something out with full force. Okay? An-Naazi'at, Allah swears by the ones that pull out. Gharqa, having dove in. Gharq here is maf'ul mutlaq, actually it's called. The grammatical term is maf'ul mutlaq min ghayri lafzihi, meaning it's used, the word gharqan is used to emphasize the act of pulling out without using the same root. Instead of saying وَالنَّازِعَاتِ نَزْعًا, it's وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. And the idea is, whatever Allah is swearing by, these are some creatures or some object that dives deep in and yanks whatever's deep inside and pulls it out. The vast majority of the mufassirun, in regards to what these things are, they mention that these are angels, the vast majority of them. And they're actually sourced in one opinion. Baghwi reports on behalf of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, that Ibn Abbas's opinion radiallahu anhu, that the Naazi'at and then An-Nashitat and so on, all of the oaths here that have at the end, all of them are referring to angels. And that's become the popular opinion among the mufassirun. The second opinion about this is that these are an-nujum, that these are the stars, that also exist. For example, Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah, his opinion is that these are stars that Allah is speaking about, stars that are being yanked out of the sky or that are falling, which was from the experience of the Arabs when they would see a comment or something like that they would comment, this is nazar, right? It's been yanked out of the sky. Anyhow, the third opinion that I will present, inshallah, of these two, obviously the most popular one is the angels. That's probably the one you've already heard also. But there is a third opinion that I would like to share and then tie them all together, inshallah ta'ala. The thing we have to understand about Quran is sometimes the text is ambiguous. Allah Azza wa Jal didn't spell out explicitly that these are angels. First, that we should be honest and know that that is the case. Allah did not spell out specifically that these are angels. The second thing to note is when there are a variety of opinions, that, especially in the first generation, that in itself is an illustration that this was ambiguous. That in itself is a proof that this is not something mutlaq, it's not absolute, it's not one way and everything else is kufr. So you find in the history of the mufassirun, you have arguments supporting, okay, this is the opinion, what are the evidences that make this opinion stronger than that opinion? Or what are the evidences that this opinion is rather weak as opposed to other opinions? So even though these opinions exist, there are opinions among later ulama that critique these opinions and try to weigh, not just by popularity, but by what other supporting evidence is there to see what opinion is the strongest. So I will present you one such opinion. One such opinion is that an-Naazi'at refers to the winds. That an-Naazi'at refers to winds. The alif ta at the end has been used consistently in the Quran and other places, which with strong linguistic evidence that it's also winds. Al-Mursalat, wal-Mursalati urfa, al-Dhariyat, al-Jariyat. There are many instances where the language suggests and the context suggests that they are in fact referring to winds. So one opinion is that it is referring to winds. But again, we already said, what's the most popular opinion? That it's the angels. So we have to try to figure out what criticism do these scholars have. For example, Islahi, rahimahullah, has the opinion that this is winds. What basis does he have? The first criticism that he offers is this, that an-Naazi'at is the feminine plural. It's called Jama' Mu'annath Salim, alif ta at the end. This is the feminine plural. And Allah Azza wa Jal in the Quran speaks against attributing femininity to angels. In the Quran itself, Allah speaks against attributing femininity to angels, and He speaks about those who attributed femininity or to angels in one place, and another place, وَاتَّخَذَ مِنَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنَاثًا, has your Lord taken daughters, or from the angels He's taken these feminine creatures, right? So there's a criticism in the Quran of this. The second issue that he brings up is when Allah does speak about angels in the Quran, what we find consistently is Jama' Mudhakkar Salim. We find munzalin, musawwimin, murdafin, yadribuna wujuhahum wa adbarahum, qalu. So you have these words that are all masculine in nature. When the plurality of angels is mentioned consistently in the Quran, we find the masculine. Another case is that Allah Azza wa Jal, even when He does say something like qalatil malaika, for those of you who know a little bit of Arabic, qalat is feminine, right? So even when that does occur, that's not because of femininity, that's because of jam' taksir. The broken plurals in Arabic, you use the feminine singular for them. So that's in the beginning. But after this, like if you say قَالَتِ الْمَلَائِكَةِ, if you reverse it, you don't say الْمَلَائِكَةُ قُلْنَا, you say الْمَلَائِكَةُ قَالُوا. So you use the masculine once again. Okay, so that's how it's found in the Quran. So that's his literary criticism, that in the Quran consistently the masculine is used. So why would this be angels if The feminine is being used. That's one criticism. The other criticism that's tied together with this is that, you know how Allah Azza wa Jal speaks about the soul being pulled out after the angels diving in, gharqan, right? So that they're going into the body. But if you study the ahadith about the soul leaving, that the soul leaves from where? Do you know? Where is it pulled out of? From the toe. From the toe. And the imagery depicted and the depictions in the ahadith are of such that the angels are not entering the body, rather they are pulling the soul out of the body. So he argues this as a criticism of this position also. Furthermore, that it's not explicitly mentioned anywhere else. So we have both opinions now. We have a majority of ulama saying that this is angels, but also a pretty strong position that it's not. It may be something else. Now, how do you reconcile these two? This actually has to do with the versatility and the comprehensive nature of the message of the Quran. We have to understand, first and foremost, Meccan Quran is talking to who? Who is it talking to? It's talking to people that don't believe. It's the kalam that's coming out of the mouth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the angel has revealed to him. But the audience, the vast majority of them, are people that don't believe him. And when they hear these words, they're not going to come to him and say, give me tafsir of Naaziaat. What is your opinion of what this means? They're not going to come. They hear this and they walk away. They take it for what at face value. So one of the most important considerations in interpreting Meccan Quran especially is when these words were used in the Quran, what was going on in the head of the mushrik Arab? How did he understand these words? How was he processing this information? And that is probably, if you want to understand the methodology of da'wah in the Quran, that takes precedence. This doesn't nullify the other opinions, because it may have relevance for us as Muslims in a more spiritual sense, in a deeper sense, and for the mushrik perhaps in a more shallow sense, but still it has some relevance to him. And maybe the first thing that doesn't come to the mushrik's mind is angels. The last thing you want to think is that the mushrik heard Quran and they said, what is that talking about? I don't get it. No, the Quran was very relevant da'wah to the mushrik. It was directly talking to him. And this is what baffled the mushrikun, that it was speaking to them in clear, bilisanin arabiyyin mubin, in clear and clarifying Arabic speech. So one more example of this before we go on to just wrap this subject up, inshallah. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, يَعْلَمُ مَا يَلِجُ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَمَا يَخْرُجُ مِنْهَا. He knows what enters into the earth and what comes out of the earth. When the mushrik hears that, what's he thinking? He's thinking of the rain going into the earth and the plant coming out of the earth. This is as far as his imagination goes. But when the believer hears that, there's more going on. There's deeper knowledge. And the deeper knowledge is, no, we also will go into the earth and we will also be coming out of the earth. So it's the same statement, but people are understanding it at different depths. So these are not contradictory statements I'm putting before you. These are at different levels, or different audiences are getting different levels of the same statement, appreciating different things. So Islahi's argument and others, basically the summary of it is, this is perhaps how the mushrik processed it. He thought of the winds. And then how would he then understand the rest of the message of the surah? But we keep the interpretation of the angels still, of course, as valid and majority. Anyhow, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. Finally, the evidence that is suggested among some scholars that this is referring to the winds is Allah Azza wa Jalla says, إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ رِيحًا صَرْصَرًا فِي يَوْمِ نَحْسٍ مُسْتَمِرٍ تَنْزِعُ النَّاسَ. The word tanzi'u in the Quran, to snatch and yank out and pull out, has been used for rih, has been used for wind. So he uses this as further supporting evidence. Anyhow, so if it is winds, then what this means is Allah is swearing by hurricane or tornado winds that yank trees out of their roots or buildings out of their foundations, like it's digging deep into the ground and pulling them out, plucking them out right away, right? And on the other hand, if this is referring to angels, it's the angels that are diving deep into the body and they are pulling and ripping the soul out that wants to stay inside the body. This is the soul of the kafir. وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا. And then nasht in the Arabic language, it refers to undoing a knot without making any effort. It refers to undoing a knot without making any effort. Another way nasht is used is when you have a loose knot and you kind of leave the animal and it wiggles a little bit and kind of gets undone by itself without any effort. This is also where nashata is used. So this is maf'ul mutlaq, which means these winds or the angels, if it's referring to the angels, it's referring to angels that seamlessly enter the body and take out the soul. Very smooth process, like the undoing of a loose knot. No force necessary to apply. And if it's referring to the winds, it's referring to smooth breeze. The breeze that is a source of calm and peace and even pleasure on the face of the one experiencing it. So two contradictory kinds of wind, if this is wind, right? The winds that are a means of destruction, and the winds that are a means of comfort, and a means of even relaxation, of course, especially in desert life. Then Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا. This, if referring to the angels, it's been interpreted as, sabh, by the way, literally means to swim quickly, or to swim in a rapid, smooth way. You know, you can swim and you're splashing and it's not smooth, but when you're swimming smoothly, then this is sabh, okay? So this perhaps is referring to the angels as they dive in, and they're diving inside the body of the person. That's how some ulama have commented on this, that they swim into the body seamlessly and they're looking for the soul and they're going to pull it out. Others have commented, no, if this is the wind, these are the clouds that are swimming in the air, floating in the air by means of the clouds that are, or the winds that are pushing them. And then finally, فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. Then the word sabaq is actually in the reference to race. When one thing is taking the lead over another, this is فَالسَّابِقَات. And there's a tha there, if you notice, those of you that are following along. What this means is it's connected to وَالسَّابِحَات. So وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا are together. The others are separated, and we already knew that they were opposites, right? النَّازِعَاتِ وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا were two very different kinds of wind, or very different kinds of angel situations. So they're separated by a wow. But وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا is necessarily a process A and then B. A being وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا, B being فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. So the angels are racing back, taking these souls, racing back for their judgment. Also the clouds, if you from the view of the Arab, he will see the clouds, some of them moving faster than others, some of them taking the lead over the others. So this was part of the view of the Arab. فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا. And then finally, فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. This is a very powerful statement and should be understood both ways. One in terms of the angels that we spoke of, and also in terms of the interpretation that it's wind. First of all, let's look at the word tadbir. The word mudabbirat is an ism fa'il from the word tadbir. Tadbir includes the meanings of planning, organization, executing a matter. It's complete, execution. And it's similar, and has contrast with another word that will come in this surah, where Allah says, ثُمَّ أَدْبَرَ يَسْعَى. It's a similar word, but it's a different structure, and it creates a different kind of meaning. But for now, understand, tadbir is thorough planning, thorough organization, thorough execution of a plan. So Allah is swearing by, again, these sabihat, and fas-sabiqat, continuing these three, that these are the ones that execute the command of Allah, amran being the command, maf'ul bihi here. So Allah swears by those who execute the command of Allah diligently and in an organized fashion. If this is referring to the angels, it is the angels that are assigned different tasks by Allah Azza wa Jal, and they do a diligent, organized job of executing those commands. If it's referring to the clouds, as is the case in Surah Al-Mursalat, we find وَالنَّاشِرَاتِ نَشْرًا فَالْفَارِقَاتِ فَرْقًا. Okay, there also we find the winds, they distribute clouds in every direction, and these clouds are racing against one another. What else does the wind distribute? The wind also distributes dust and pollen. Also, by means of the winds, the clouds that are distributing, the clouds are going to bring rain. So if you think about it, winds are the means by which life is sustained on the earth. Everything you need for life on the earth is plant life, and plant life can't be sustained without pollen, which is now delivered by wind. And on the other hand, the rain from the sky, without which plant life can't exist, the clouds are delivered by the wind. So Allah has executed this organized plan of delivering these clouds. Some places won't get any, some places will be dried up and become places of death and famine, and other places will be flooded with water, other places will turn into lush gardens, all part of an executed plan from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these plans being executed by means of the wind. So this is the other interpretation of فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. There are other words for planning that we should know about that are used in the Quran. So we use the word tadbir here, mudabbirat. Then we find the word kaid also. Like Allah says, فَإِنْ كَانَ لَكُمْ كَيْدٌ فَكِيدُونَ. Right? Also we find وَكَذَلِكَ كِدْنَا لِيُوسُف. What's the difference between tadbir, which is planning, and kaid, which is also planning. Kaid is actually a secret plan. The fundamental element in kaid is secrecy. So it's a plan which you don't want anybody else to find out about, because part of exposing it will be to spoil the plan. It won't be any good if it comes out in the open. Another word used for planning is makr. And makr has an element of conflict in it. A plan that necessarily has to do with retaliation against an enemy. And when Allah is used with makr, like وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ, it's only used in the retaliatory sense. Meaning whenever Allah mentions that He's planning against an opposing force, it's always mentioned that they took the first step. They did makr first. So وَمَكَرُوا first, and then وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. So there's a difference. We don't typically use makr with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless in that reaction to the makr that was done by the wrongdoer to begin with. Then finally we have another word, hila. Hila, like وَالْوِلْدَانِ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ حِيلَةً. Hila is a kind of plan that you make to, nowadays there's a lot of hila in society, by the way. It's a clever plan. It's a clever plan. The idea of which is to maximize one's benefit or minimize one's harm without breaking the law, but at least trying to bend it, manipulating the system, working around the system. So accountants are really good at hila, for example, during tax season, right? Some of the scholars spoke about hila in the ancient times, in the times of Islamic rule, that the person would give all of their wealth as a gift to their wife right before zakat season, and then they would make the wealth gifted back to them after zakat season is done. So this was a kind of, working around the law. Don't get any ideas. But this was the kind of hila that was done before. Anyhow, so these are different kinds of plans. Allah Azza wa Jalla specifically mentions فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا here, which the word includes planning, execution, organization, diligence, and actually means taking a step back before you take an action, because it comes from dubr, which is the back of something. And it's to turn back from the affair, think it through, and then come back and can execute it. That's the interpretation of the word tadbir. Anyway, now that Allah Azza wa Jal has taken an oath by these few things, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا, by those who dive deep in and yank out, وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا, those who sail smoothly, like the undoing of a knot, then فَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا, those who swim or float effortlessly, seamlessly, those who race one against one another diligently, and then finally those that plan or execute the affair with thorough planning. After all of these oaths, Allah Azza wa Jal moves on to another subject. And yes, last time we talked about the subject matter of Quran, paragraphs in the Quran, incredibly organized in the sense of even their rhyme scheme. So the first few were oaths in the Quran, and they all rhyme. So if you recite them, you will hear the rhyme scheme. وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا وَالسَّابِحَاتِ سَبْحًا فَالسَّابِقَاتِ سَبْقًا فَالْمُدَبِّرَاتِ أَمْرًا. Now if you look at the next few ayat, you'll just hear it even. Even if you don't read tafsir, you'll hear it. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةِ قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ. You hear the scheme, right? Because it's a united subject. So even phonetically it's united, subhanAllah. Now we come to this next part, but before we do, understand that when an oath is taken, there's what you took an oath, but now you want to say something. Like, I swear by X, I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to do this part. What am I swearing by? What is the statement that I'm about to make? That is actually hadf here, it's mahdhuf here. It's not mentioned. The reason it isn't mentioned is because this is a part of a series of surahs where it has been mentioned. And it forces us to look at the tafsir of this surah in surahs that are similar to it. So for instance, you find وَالْمُرْسَلَاتِ عُرْفًا فَالْعَاصِفَاتِ عَصْفًا وَالنَّاشِرَاتِ نَشْرًا فَالْفَارِقَاتِ فَرْقًا فَالْمُلْقِيَاتِ ذِكْرًا عُذْرًا أَوْ نُذْرًا, and then جواب القسم إِنَّمَا تُوعَدُونَ لَوَاقِعٌ. All of those oaths were taken for what conclusion? No doubt about it, whatever you have been promised is bound to occur. Whatever you have been promised is bound to occur. That conclusion is understood here because it's part of that chain of discourse. It's understood that when they hear these oaths, the next thing to expect is resurrection. But Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't spell it out, which has benefits. One of the benefits is it forces you to look at other texts in the Quran. Al-Quran yufassiru ba'dahu ba'dan. The other thing it forces to do is the person who hears oaths, they're expecting to hear, what are these oaths about? What's he going to talk about? So now they're in more anticipation of what is to come. But Allah doesn't give them what they were expecting, so they keep on listening. They still haven't figured out what exactly is this thing about. So now Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks about the depiction of the day of resurrection. Here, before continuing, understand a contrast with Surah An-Naba. In Surah An-Naba, in the beginning we had عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ الَّذِي هُمْ فِيهِ مُخْتَلِفُونَ. There was a depiction of the skeptic. They're asking each other, what is this, when is this going to happen? And, Allah threatens them, they will soon find out. And then He starts talking about the hereafter. So He spoke of the skeptic first, and the hereafter second. In this surah, He reverses the sequence. Here He mentions the hereafter first, and He will mention the skeptic later. يَقُولُونَ أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ فِي الْحَافِرَةِ. That's later. So there's a reversal. This actually in Arabic literature is a mechanism called al-laf wa nashr ala al-aks. That you fold something up and then you unfold it in its reflection or in the opposite. So you know how the mirror, if you put an object before the mirror, they're exactly the same except they're organized opposite. You lift your right hand, the mirror is lifting the left hand, etc. Right? So that's the idea here. One surah is organized one way, and this will do the flip organization of the ideas presented in Surah An-Naba in many ways, one of which is this. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. Rajif in Arabic is related to some other words. Inshallah, we'll discuss some of these words. The first thing to note is Rajif has to do with rattling or shaking. Okay, and there are a bunch of words in the Quran for this. And it's important whenever you come to a word that has other synonymous terms in the Quran that you should highlight the differences between them, because it gives clarity to one particular text over the other. Other words that are used in the Quran, for example, zalzala, إِذَا زُلْزِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ زِلْزَالَهَا. The origin of that word is from zalla, which means when someone's feet slip. And zalzala, because of the repetition of the phonetics, in the sounds, it actually alludes to repetition, meaning someone's feet keep on slipping. When does that happen? During an earthquake. That's why it's called zalzala, because one's feet keep on tripping up. So that's one. The other is zaj. Raj. إِذَا رُجَّتِ الْأَرْضُ رَجَّا. Right? Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks about raj. And this is actually an initial jerk. Like something was stationary and all of a sudden it was put into motion. This is raj. Ulama comment that this is the first moment of the experience of an earthquake. That's raj. That's the very beginning of the experience of the earthquake. Then we have mara. يَوْمَ تَمُورُ السَّمَاءُ مَوْرًا. This is actually used when you are, for example, riding a horse, or you're running really fast, or a large animal passes by you running fast, and it simulates the feeling of an earthquake. It's not really an earthquake, but everything's shaking because of the rapid motion. That is called mara. Finally, we come to the word that's used in this ayah. Allah says, يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. When that which is meant to rattle, rajifa, the rattling one, will eventually rattle. Allah Azza wa Jal did not here mention the earth. In another place in the Quran, Allah says, يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الْأَرْضُ وَالْجِبَالِ تَرْجُفُ الْأَرْضُ وَالْجِبَالِ وَكَانَتِ الْجِبَالُ كَثِيبًا مَهِيلًا. The day on which the land, the earth, and the mount, and the large boulder mount, they are going to rattle. They're going to shake and vibrate, as though they were kathiban mahila, that they were sand dunes. When you shake a pile of sand, the sand keeps tripping over and falling off, right? As though they were that soft. That's how the earth is going to shake, that Allah describes. Imagine salt in a salt shaker, basically. That's the image that Allah depicts. But there He said the earth and the mountains are going to shake. Here He said يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الْأَرْضُ وَالْجِبَالِ. No, يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. Al-Rajifa means that which is meant to shake. What this illustrates is the purpose of the creation of the heavens and the earth. Its final destination is the point where it's going to shake. It's going to be rattled. This is its destiny. It can't be avoided. So much so that it's called Al-Rajifa. It's so much so that the fa'il isn't Al-Ard wal-Jibal, that it's Rajifa itself. So it's a profound declaration in the Quran about the reality of that shaking. Finally, just a comment about the word Rajaf. It's a highly uncomfortable motion. And it actually doesn't just depict the motion itself, it depicts the state of the one who is affected by that motion, that they're in a state of discomfort and disarray. Now, يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. Then Allah says, تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةِ. It will be followed by a radifa. Radif in Arabic implies, when you're riding a camel or a horse and somebody's sitting behind you, then they are radif. They're riding behind you. People sitting in the back seat of your car nowadays, they're radif. They're following right along. Wherever you go, they're going, because they're on the same ride. So Allah Azza wa Jal mentions that it'll be followed by another vibration, another jerking, another violent movement, one successively following the other, one meant to follow the other. A lot of the ulama are pretty much in agreement on this radifah, this following shaking and vibrating, that the first one is when the first time the trumpet will be blown. You know, in the previous surah we said, وَنُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ, right? We've heard those words. And now that's being opened up. There's a tafsir of the previous text in the next surah. Okay? So now, how many times will the trumpet be blown? Twice. The first one, يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الرَّاجِفَةِ. Then the second one, تَتْبَعُهَا الرَّادِفَةِ. So there's a long gap between them, but they are one to succeed the other one. One comes necessarily, the other's on its way. Radif literally implies, like we said, to sit behind. And you know, when words come one after another in meaning, that they're very close to each other in meaning, but they're not exactly the same, but they're still very close, they're called mutaradif. So synonyms in Arabic are called mutaradifat, for example. That's because they're very close to one another. Other words that speak of following in the Quran are khalfa. Khalfa actually refers to when you follow something chronologically, meaning something came, then thereafter something else came, that's khalf. Radif, literally right behind, like we said, situated behind and moving along with. Then we have tala, which is to follow something carefully and repeatedly. Like for example, it's used for the sun and the moon, because the sun and the moon follow a path repeatedly. Anyhow, قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ. Allah says, first of all, the earth will violently shake when the trumpet is blown. And then the second time, it will be shaken another time. And this other time is when we will be raised. The first one was for death, and the second one is for resurrection. So now, on the time of this resurrection, Allah depicts the first thing. He says, قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ. Hearts on that day. And actually, قُلُوبٌ, by mentioning it first, and not putting al on it, which is normally the case in Jumla Ismiya, but not putting al on it, there's an interesting nuanced meaning that's generated. Some hearts on that day, some hearts particularly on that day, will experience what Allah depicts as wajifa. Here, I know this is a long list, but I still want to illustrate this list, or at least express some of the meanings in this list before we go into the word wajifa, because it's critical for you to appreciate the depth of the words in Arabic. One of my agendas in these durus is to try to highlight how incomplete translations are. How incomplete, even my own translation, how incomplete it is. Because how deep the words go and how intricate the meanings are connected to one another. And we have to be careful in coming to conclusions about the tafsir of Quran. Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks about the word wajif, and most translations will say petrified, horrified, terrified, scared. These are the words. Basically words associated with fear. Now here's some words in the Quran that are used for fear, just so we know how they're different. One of the words used for fear is khawf. Khawf. You probably heard this word before. It's a very famous word. La khawfun alayhim wa lahum yahzanun. Khawf is used for a perceived danger. When you actually perceive a physical danger, then the word used is khawf. Another word is khashya, like وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشْيَةَ إِمْلَاقٍ. Okay? Khashya is used when you are afraid of the magnitude of something. Specifically out of the magnitude of whatever is coming, that is scaring you, that is khashya. So khawf is more of a physical danger, while khashya is the greatness of something, like the magnitude of the implications of losing one's job, or the magnitude of just the idea of Day of Judgment will lead you to khashya, for example. Then there's the word khushu', which we use, for example, also in salah. This is a fear that's manifest not only in your heart, but it actually takes a hold of your face and your limbs. This fear shows on your face and your limbs. It's an overpowering and instilling kind of fear. And this is the kind of fear we're supposed to have in salah. That it actually, our faces have khushu', not just our hearts. That khushu' comes out of the heart and it starts affecting other limbs of the body. Then there's the word taqwa, which is very common. Ittaqa yattaqi. This is to actually fear the consequences of one's actions. To fear not something dangerous, but the consequences of what I'm doing myself. This is actually called taqwa. It comes from wiqaya, which is to protect. And taqwa literally means to protect yourself from the consequences of your own future actions. Okay, that's how it's really in the literary sense it's understood. Then there's hadr, like hadar al-maut, right? They out of fear of death. Again, the translation will say hadr means fear, but hadr is actually out of fear to try to escape something, or to be very careful of something. If you see something scary and you're trying to kind of escape it, this is hadr. This is that specific kind of fear, which means you're in proximity of the thing that is dangerous, or the thing that you're trying to get away from. Then there's ra'a. to startle someone. When you jump up on somebody or you show up out of nowhere, or the person was just reading and they unexpectedly heard the door open, the initial reaction is raw'a. This is this fear immediate, but it subsides immediately also. This is the kind of fear that Ibrahim alayhi salam first felt when the angels came, but it departed from him. It left from him. This is raha. Okay. Then there's awjasa, or wajas it comes from. And this is actually a fear when you hear something. You know, like you hear something, you get scared? Or you hear something that scared you. You hear some news or some event you overheard and it scared you. This is awjas. Also means to actually hide your fear within you. You don't let the person that is scaring you or the thing that is scaring you know that you're actually scared. Okay? Nakarahum wa awjasa minhum khifa. This is actually spoken of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Nakirahum. He saw them, he didn't recognize them, he didn't know who these guys are, so he was kind of scared, but he didn't let them see that he was scared. So awjasa is used. He didn't let them see his fear. Then there's wajl. You know, إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. Wajl is used. Now, wajl is to have a fear that penetrates deep into your heart. A fear that penetrates into the very depths of your heart. That's wajl. Rahab is a fear mixed with, it's actually mixed with love. So it's a kind of fear you have of disappointing the one you love. When you're afraid of disappointing the person that you love, then rahab is used. Allah Azza wa Jal speaks, for example, of believers saying, يَدْعُونَنَا رَغَبًا وَرَهَبًا. They call on us with inclination, they're inclined towards their Lord, and they're also afraid. But what kind of fear? The fear of disappointing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's rahab. Okay? Then finally, rahab actually to be overwhelmed with intense fear. This is وَقَذَفَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمُ الرُّعْبَ. Also, ru'b comes from this, right? To have overwhelming, terrified fear of someone that makes you lose your reason. Then, ashfaqa, this is the kind of fear all of us have. This comes from, it's actually related to the word shafiqa ala. To have, shafqa over someone is to take care of them, to be concerned with their well-being, etc., right? To show good to them. But then ashfaqa means that you're afraid that some harm will come to them. The one you're taking care of, you're also scared that some harm might come their way. So many different kinds of fear illustrated in so many different places where it's best situated in the Quran. Of all of these, finally, we come to the word wajaf, which is قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ. That's the word that's used here. What is special about this kind of fear? It is a fear mixed with discomfort. And it's illustrated, the one who's feeling wajaf is the one whose heart is pounding so hard they can feel it out of fear. That's when wajaf is used. And this is also used when you strike your horse and its heart starts pounding and it races forward. So you say, أَوْجَفْتُ الْخَيْلَ. I made my horse race forward by making its heart race. So that's the kind of fear that Allah depicts on that day. When that second strike will fall, when that second shaking will occur, some hearts on that day will be basically beating out of their chests. That's the illustration here. قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ. Especially on that day, some hearts will be beating out of their chests. The language, the sentence structure here also illustrates that these hearts right now, they're not scared. Right now they're at peace. They have no discomfort at all. But these are the very same hearts, especially on that day, yawma idin, they're going to experience this wajifa. And also wajifa is an ism fa'il, it's a nominal form. What that illustrates is, when your heart starts pounding, a few minutes later it comes to rest, it calms down. The choice of the word in the ayah illustrates their heart will start pounding and it won't come to rest. It'll continuously keep pounding. It'll keep, the terror won't subside. قُلُوبٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاجِفَةٌ. Then Allah says something beautiful. He says, أَبْصَارُهَا خَاشِعَةٌ. Again depicting the terror of that day. Sometimes Allah depicts the terror of that day by things that are going to happen on that day, like the sun and the moon's collision and big, big things. Sometimes He depicts the terror of that day looking at the person and how scared they are. Not at the scary things that are happening, but their reaction to those things. So this is a surah that's highlighting more so the reaction to the events of the Day of Judgment of this person. Allah says, أَبْصَارُهَا خَاشِعَةٌ. Their vision, the visions of those hearts, or the eye, there here refers to the hearts, not the people, because it's not أَبْصَارُهُمْ, it's أَبْصَارُهَا. What this tells us is that the vision is directly connected to the heart. That's a very important reality to understand. What you see and how you perceive what you see is directly affected by what you have in your heart. When you have iman in your heart, what you see will be a reminder for you. When you feel the wind, when you see the sun, when you see the clouds, you'll get a reminder out of them. When you don't have iman in your heart, those same eyes will do nothing for you. So now on that day, people will not see except from a believing heart, because now iman is haqqul yaqeen and ayn al yaqeen. They've seen it. So now those hearts, those eyes that are connected to these hearts now that are petrified, what's going to happen to those eyes? Khashi'ah. They will be overpowered, overwhelmed, humbled. Their muscles be relaxed. So these eyes will be overwhelmed by the fear that is going to be presented before them. Now this was the state of these some hearts that don't feel any fear now, but they will fear this terrifying day then. Now immediately there's an iltifat, there's a transition, and this transition illustrates irony. The irony of the whole thing is, as it stands now, يَقُولُونَ أَإِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ فِي الْحَافِرَةِ. They say, a rough translation, they say, is it really the case that we're going to be returned to the original state? We're going to come back to life as we are now? Right back where we started is the expression we use in English, that's for hafira. You know, if somebody says, for example, in Arabic, فُلَانٌ رَجَعَ إِلَى حَافِرَتِهِ, or فِي حَافِرَتِهِ. This is an expression in ancient Arabic. This person came back right where they started. So when they hear this whole thing about us coming back to life, our hearts pounding, you know, then the first reaction they have is, oh, come on, we're going to come back right to this again? We're going to be back here again? Some of the scholars commented on the word hafira, which is an important word here, but a couple of things here. Number one, the word mardud. إِنَّا لَمَرْدُودُونَ. Are we really going to be returned? But this rad refers to a kind of return when you go somewhere and you weren't accepted and you were returned. Like you tried to cross the border and they didn't accept your paperwork and they sent you back. This is rad. So they're saying we're going to be rejected and sent back like this. Like our death wasn't acceptable enough, now we have to be brought back to life. This is a means of sarcasm of the disbeliever. Then he says al-hafira. Al-hafira is literally from hufr, which is a ditch in the ground that you dig. Okay, or mihfar is actually a shovel. That's how it's used. So they're basically saying, you know, the imagery in language, you have to understand imagery in classical Arabic is, you know, when you don't dig the ground, it's the way it's supposed to be. And then you make all this effort of digging it. And then you are asked to bring it back exactly where it used to be. Back to normal again. So they're saying, come on, it's already, our graves are dug. We're set the way we are. We're not going to come out of this now. It's done deal. This resurrection after death doesn't seem like it's a very possible prospect.